And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show right here on ESPN New Hampshire. Glad you guys could join us. And don't forget about following us on Twitter. We'd appreciate it. It's at Talkin' Boxing. That's TALKIN BOXING. And if you're looking for a great Christmas gift, don't forget about my book, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. It's available right now where all good books are sold. You can get it online, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or you can visit our website, www.billycboxing.com, and click on the book club section. Now, don't forget, as of this weekend, actually, it'll be available electronically. So check out Kindle and all them other places where you can get Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. What a great read, and makes a great Christmas gift. And it's time for
Blast from the Past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Marciano, top-ranking Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time. Look at that left hook. Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past, which is being sponsored by KOFantasyBoxing.com. Check it out, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com. Features a former world champion and boxing Hall of Famer, and it was requested that we do a blast from my man Angel and his father from Madison, Wisconsin. Edwin Chapo Rosario is who we're going to talk about. And joining me right now to tell us all about Chapo is my man Alex Perpali. What's up, brother?
Hey, Billy. Good evening.
How you doing today, my man?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Excited to talk about a guy that was smack in the middle of an era that you got to see a lot of, and Edwin Rosario was a quality fighter. He's also, as we're going to learn when we start talking about this guy, how quickly he seemed to have. I don't want to say lose it, but kind of, I mean, some fighters you see, they linger on and you could see them, losing their talent slowly, and it starts to leave them. And then other fighters, it leaves overnight. We watched it happen in one fight, and then they never seem to be the same. And I lean towards that with Edwin Rosario. What the reasons are could be many, but that's the way I look at Edwin Rosario. Tell us about this guy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's one way to look at him. As there are some fighters that come in and out of the game like meteors, and they flame in and flame out. And unfortunately, that's sometimes they're some of the most thrilling fighters. But it's usually a sad end. And kind of like we did last week with Hector Camacho. Rosario is another Puerto Rican fighter. They were also rivals, linked through one classic fight. But Edwin El Chapo Rosario, born March 15th, 1963, the name of the town is Ingenio, which it's a barrio of Toa Baja in Puerto Rico. I'm sorry. And he's 5'6" tall, and he boxed at lightweight as well as junior welterweight. Won 3 lightweight titles, unfortunately, I think that's one of the reasons why he doesn't probably get quite as much cred as some of the other fighters of the era. As he was not a undisputed champion, he was a titleist, but like I said, in 2 different weight classes. That's always pretty impressive. Started boxing at the age of 9 years old. His father was a fisherman, and his mom was a nurse's aide. And I guess his dad was a big fan of cockfighting, which in Puerto Rico, that's not against the law. And I guess eventually, as Rosario made some money, he eventually actually built a stadium for cockfighting. I didn't know you actually needed a stadium to have a cockfight, but apparently, hey, you want to do it right.
They're not that big.
Yeah, El Chapo is actually short for Chaparrito, which I guess means little man.
Yeah. You say he started boxing at 9. he turned pro less than 2 weeks before he turned 16, which is kind of amazing, too, because you hear about that a lot when we do the Blast from the Past, but it's generally during eras in the 20s and 30s and 40s, not, a guy that's actually, if he was alive today, would be younger than I, So I found that pretty interesting, and it was something that kind of I think they kind of shovel under the carpet a little bit. They kind of go through that really quick, because it's something that I totally forgot that he started that young.
Yeah, he had a lot of success young, and I think that's probably goes along with being. He was a big puncher. He had heavy hands, real explosive power for a little guy, and he did. He got a nice TV launching pad on Wilfredo Gomez was fighting Derek Holmes, and I guess it was one of these ABC, afternoon fights, ABC Wide World of Sports. That fight ended early. Gomez scored a knockout. So ABC went to the videotape of the undercard and showed Rosario, who was then 17. And in upstate New York, a couple of boxing geeks were sitting at home watching Wild World of Sports, Customato being one of them, Jimmy Jacobs being another. I guess D'Amato called Jacobs and said, "Are you seeing this kid?" At the time, Rosario was only 17. It was his 10th victory by KO in as many fights. And they got in touch with, very soon after that, they got in touch with Manny Siaka. It's not like today where, they could have just emailed him probably that moment or tweeted to him. So, you had to do some legwork. And they did. They eventually picked up his contract. So that's why there is a bit of a connection, too, with that, with the Jimmy Jacobs, Bill Caton, Customato, Mike Tyson crowd with Edwin Rosario.
When he started his career young in Puerto Rico, like you say, it's actually we're in the Dominican Republic, but he did come on over to the States fairly quickly in big arenas, and he had a couple of fights early on that got him into the limelight, like you mentioned. And I think in 1985 when he fought Edwin Verjuet at the Aladdin in Las Vegas, and I could have sworn I was there. I was looking through all my stuff because I had seen a few fights in that time frame at the Aladdin before that went away, and I couldn't find it. I didn't remember it, but I'm like, man, the dates are right. But from that fight on, though, Alex, when you look at this guy's career, he immediately, that fight catapulted him, and he fought other fights leading up to that, but that catapulted him for his shot at his first title against basically a ring legend at the time, Jose Luis Ramirez, in his very next fight in May of 1983. And then the list is just, like I was saying earlier, Roberto Elizondo, Howard Davis Jr., Ramirez again, which he lost his title to, but he got back up on the horse, Frankie Randall, and then which led to the a fight against Hector Camacho. These were all big fights that he did well against. The Camacho fight was a classic fight that was a classic controversy. Many people feel that he won that fight. And then he fought Julio Cesar Chavez in 1987, and to me that's when you could start to take a look at him and say maybe he just wasn't the same after that, because although he rattled off a bunch of wins after that fight, they were all against very weak opposition. As a matter of fact, his next 7 fights, mostly all knockout wins. As a matter of fact, all of them knockout wins until he got his shot at another title against Anthony Jones in 1989. Now, isn't that the Anthony Jones that got arrested for robbing a bank? Is that the same guy, or am I confusing him with somebody else?
I don't know. Looking really quick, I don't see.
Okay, I thought Anthony Jones was the guy that just recently. Maybe I'm confusing him with somebody else. But that's the way I see it. I see all these great fights. A nice title run. The Camacho fight, the Bramble win, the Roger Brown win, the Juan Nascaro win, and then he steps in with Julio Cesar Chavez, and things kind of started going in a different direction.
Yeah, I would say that if you looked at his career, I would say that was probably his prime. There was from I would say probably from coming back from the Camacho loss, which was a disputed loss, which, as we talked about last week, really altered the career of Camacho. I mean, I think that's the thing that's most interesting about these two guys, is that they had some of the same demons of substance abuse, and I think the big thing that they both were Puerto Ricans, fighting basically out of a transplanted home. Well, out of New York, the New York area to some degree. And the thing that made Rosario different and maybe a little more fun in some people's mind is power. He knocked guys out. Camacho, tended not to. But like we said, part of the reasons why he didn't anymore was because of Edwin Rosario and that fight. But then I would say that, like you mentioned, that if you look at his career, that's probably his prime. Because his next fight after Camacho, he bounces back well, stopped Livingston Bramble, and part of that was there were times on two occasions in the Camacho fight, and how much of a pivotal point in his career it was that he had Camacho hurt twice, in the 5th and he thought again in the 11th. He didn't finish him. When he fought Bramble, he said, if I hurt this guy, I'm going to end it, and he certainly did. You're right. Then when he runs into Julio Cesar Chavez, that probably did alter his career to a great degree. If people look at that fight, you'll see why. It was absolutely brutal. It's one of Chavez's signature wins, in my opinion. It's absolutely brutal. Chavez is just this elemental pressing force that just, the left hook to the body is just brutal, and he just really breaks Rosario down. It's really, vintage Chavez, and it could have been one of those debilitating type defeats that really did change him. The other fight, he had some good fights with, they're dirty as hell, but you could find them on YouTube, with Juan Nazario.
Yeah.
And one of them, I'm not sure if they both include bites, but one of them does have an actual bite in it, which, a lot of people think that the first time that happened was Tyson and Holyfield, but no, boxing has had some bite fights.
No, I saw one on Tuesday Night Fights. Somebody took a bite out.
Oh, that's right.
It was like a Samoan guy, right? He bit somebody right in the back or something, and so did
you were calling a fight where he bit him right in the neck.
Oh, that was another one that we did. That was a fight that we did on LDL TV. But no, I'm talking about years ago. There was one on Tuesday Night Fights, and then Galata bit somebody in the back too.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're right about I couldn't have said it better. The Julio Cesar Chavez fight was a brutal fight. If you haven't seen that fight, ladies and gentlemen, go watch it, because it was a brutal fight, and I do think that changed his career. But an interesting thing, when you look at Rosario's career, and you see where he got that loss, where he lost his title. He wins his title against Jose Luis Ramirez in 1983. He loses it a year later in 1984. Then he rattles off 4 wins in a row against decent opposition, a couple of layups, but some other good ones, including Frankie Randall. And then he fights twice in 1986, the fight against Camacho and then the win against Bramble. And as a result of those 2 fights, arguably 2 fights in 1 year, one he lost, even though a lot of people think he won, and one he won by knockout. And then previously, you don't really see that much of a negative swing in his career, with the exception of the one loss to Jose Luis Ramirez in 1984. But yet he wins the Ring Comeback Fighter of the Year in 1986. So I think that goes to show you what the ramifications of just those 2 fights in 1986 were for him. The fight against Hector Camacho, and then obviously winning his title back winning a title back against Livingstone Bramble in September of the same year.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely was a big year for him. And
yeah, but two fights. That's my point. Usually a comeback, a Ring Magazine Comeback Fighter of the Year award is a fighter that it came back from some negative stuff, like a couple of losses, and then has a great year, 3, 4, 5 fights. Here's a guy that's actually coming off of wins, looking good in his fights the previous years, and only fights twice in 1986, winning one and losing one, and still wins the Comeback of the Year award. So
yeah, I'm not quite sure why it is comeback. If maybe because later
he lost
on in his career, he talks about spending a year in jail. He had a 5-year battle with drug addiction. He had been in rehab for 9 months, so I wonder if part of that was, outside of the ring type of comeback. Because you're right, when you look at his record, after the Ramirez fight, it was 1, 2, 3, 4 wins, then Camacho, then Bramble. So
right.
What's the comeback?
Right,
yeah.
and it wasn't a long layoff. It wasn't the layoff that he straightened his ass out. That came after. That was in 1987 after his Juan Nascaro win. I'm sorry. It came later than that. It came after the Frankie Randall loss. When he lost to Randall, he was out for 4 years. That's when he cleaned his act up. But the thing was that you look at those fights, and it was only a several month layover between him winning against Montoya in 1985. 6 months later, he loses to Camacho, and then 3 months after that, he beats Bramble. I think that basically it was Ring Magazine's way of, in my opinion, looking back at it now and in hindsight, it almost seems like they felt he won the fight against Camacho, and he just stayed the course and ended up becoming the WBA's world lightweight champion by beating Livingstone Bramble, who had beaten Boom Boom Mancini. So,
Yeah, you're right that it could have been like their sort of political statement saying that, he bounced back from being screwed by the powers that be out of a win that he should have had.
Right, and the thing is to win a Comeback Fighter of the Year award, usually you're fighting more than twice, and basically you're winning most of the fights. I mean, here's a guy that fought twice in that year, winning one and losing one, so yeah. I give him a lot of credit. My point is I give him a lot of credit for that award. He also was named by the Ring Magazine the 36th greatest puncher of all time back in 2003, which was another great award. But you mentioned his battle with drugs and alcohol, something I didn't know and I didn't get a chance to look into, but he had an older brother, Luis Rosario, Papo, who most people in Puerto Rico thought was the best of the Rosario clan, and thought that he would be the next big Puerto Rican superstar, but he succumbed to drugs and alcohol, which kind of got Rosario into fighting, and then it's kind of ironic that he himself suffered the same battles. Yeah,
very sad, and it does show you that addiction is the toughest opponent. It is one of those things that it doesn't go away. He had done a stint in rehab for 9 months, 9 months. Can you imagine being in rehab 9 months? I mean, that's a long time. A few months before he did pass away. As a matter of fact, about his brother had actually boxed a draw with Alfonso Zamora. So yeah, there were some talented boxers in the Rosario family. But yeah, about his death, he was only 34 years old. The official cause was pulmonary edema, which is an excessive buildup of fluid in the lungs. He was, like I said, in the process of trying to make a comeback. He had dropped off, had spent some time with his, he had 4 daughters, and he had spent some time with them, and then drove home to his parents' house where he was living and said he didn't feel too well and was just going to take a little nap. And I guess his father went to check on him a little while later, and he was dead. It wasn't ruled out that drugs or alcohol contributed to his death, but I guess the autopsy mainly just showed pulmonary edema. The Associated Press did say that intoxication or narcotics could have been involved. But yeah, just really sad, and like we talked about last week with Hector Camacho, those. It's one thing fighting people in the ring, but at some point, when there's nobody around and there's nobody cheering your name and stuff, when you have that addiction, that propensity towards addiction, it never goes away, and it's constantly eating at you. And if you do succumb, fall victim to it, it can really ruin everything.
I want to clarify something. My man Louis from L.A. in the chat room corrected us. James Page was the former world champion that is doing time in a federal penitentiary for robbing banks, not Anthony Jones, who I'm mistaken was confusing the two. The report that I heard on his death that I had gotten was that they did think that it was, you're right about the fluid in his lungs and stuff was the initial cause of the actual cause of death. But the doctors thought that there was some contributing factors that were related with his past history with drugs and alcohol. But the autopsy did reveal that none were in his system at the time of his death, and that he had been trying to clean up. When he had walked away from boxing and was at his all-time low, it followed his seventh-round stoppage loss to the hands of Frankie Randall in 1993. He was off for 4 years, where he did clean himself up, and he had battled back and won in his comeback. When he started his comeback in May of 1997, he had fought 5 fights up until his death. It was a little 2 months after his last fight, which was against Harold Bennett in September of 1997. He had won all 5 of those comeback fights, 4 of them by knockout. And of those 5 fights, he did step in the ring with a ranked fighter in August of 1997 against Sanford Hicks, who was 20 wins and 4 losses. He was a top 15 ranked fighter at the time. So he was trying to work his way back into another shot at the time of his death, and it's a shame because it's ironic because it seemed like he had won the battle against the demons and was trying to make another run for it, and unfortunately died prematurely at 34 years old, man.
Yeah, and it could be one of those things that just shows you that sometimes the body from that kind of hard living, you just shorten your life, and even when you're not doing it, your whole system just has been through a lot. But it's just a shame, and when you think about it, when you can't help but want to rate, especially when we're going into Cotto Canelo. You look at the great heritage of boxing heritage that both Mexico and Puerto Rico have, and after doing these blasts, back to back here, Camacho and now Rosario, I think you can't help but rank Camacho higher than Rosario because even though Rosario, I'm tempted to say was the better fighter because he did. I mean, he broke Camacho when you think about it. He changed his whole. He pounded him, changed his whole style. Camacho had, another 20 years in the ring.
That's my point. I was going to say the longevity factor, and the fact that...
just that alone. There's no way that Chapo can compare because of his tragic youthful death.
Well, also style. I think that Camacho, and like we had said when we did the blast on Hector, prior to the Edwin Rosario fight, Hector Camacho could have been the greatest fighter of all time, if it wasn't for Edwin Rosario, because, this was a guy that displayed hand speed, punching power, wasn't afraid to get in your face and show you that until he stepped in the ring with Edwin Rosario, who, was hitting him with some power shots that Hector Camacho never had received before. And then when you fast forward it, several more years, Edwin Rosario, because of that style, and really Camacho should have thanked him for changing his so he could have the longevity. Edwin Rosario, because of his style, his career was cut short. Hey, Alex, hold that thought. I want to continue with this, but it's that time again where I got to take a short break. So Alex isn't going to go anywhere. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in 2.
Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. Every week, 2 hours of the best boxing talk on the radio.
I have a bunch of questions, Donnell, right? If you feel like you want to, you can answer for JD first. Why will you win? JD Chapman, why will you win?
Baby Holmes will get sick and get hit by a train that day on the way to the fight, or he might have diarrhea, he might have the flu, he might throw up. One of his eyeballs might fall out that day, and I might get lucky.
Talkin' Boxing
with Billy C. If you want your voice heard on Talkin' Boxing with Billy C, then call our hotline at 845-228-8710. Leave a voicemail, or you could just tell Billy C that you like his mustache.
Should I ask you your opinion about this idea?
I'm just trying to give you the encouragement.
Listen, all I need from you is to make sure you don't hang up on people.
And if we like your call, we'll play it back on the air.
You have the knowledge and wisdom of boxing because of what you do and how well you do it.
Leave your name, hometown, and what you think of the show. 845-228-8710. We want to hear you.
Hey, fight fans, check out KOFantasyBoxing.com. KO Fantasy Boxing is boxing's only trademarked fantasy game. Check it out, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com. Select your own gym, your own fighters, track them through a season that can last from 3 months to a year, depending upon which league you join. You got to check this out, man, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com. Join it today. Again, www.KOFantasyBoxing.com, and tell them Billy C sent ya.
Broadcasting in all corners of the globe, on the web and radio.
He would scoff at a stretch of that man, I would think.
You're listening to Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. From upstate New York and the good old US of A.
Boxing is here to stay because we are here to stay.
The best 2 hours of boxing talk on the airwaves.
Now back to Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. He may not have an Excellence in Broadcasting award, but the night's still young.
And he's got martinis.
So you never know what may be by morning. It's Talkin' Boxing with Billy C.
Talkin' Boxing with Billy C.
Now back to Talkin' Boxing with Billy C.
And Shabbat Shalom. We're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show. Check out our website, www.billycboxing.com. And right now we're smack in the middle of our weekly blast from the past. This week we're on talking about boxing Hall of Famer and former multi-division world champion Edwin Rosario. Alex Perpali is on the line with me right now. And Alex, before we went to break, I was just mentioning that Edwin Rosario, because of his style, might have shortened his own career, but he lengthened last week's blast from the past, Hector Macho Camacho. And with that thought, something that you had said a while ago when we were talking about the elusive Hall of Fame for guys like Marlon Starling and possibly Donald Curry and stuff like that, you said, you felt that the Hall of Fame sometimes has a tendency to look at fighters and see who they beat, and if there's other Hall of Famers that are in there that they got to win against, it kind of enhances their chances of getting in. And with that said, you would think that Hector Camacho would get in easily, considering Edwin Rosario got in 2006.
Yeah, that could certainly help Camacho, that he has a win over another Hall of Famer. Yeah, definitely. I think that's very likely to help him.
He's got two. He's got one. He's got more than two. He's got
Duran, 2 wins over Duran.
He's got Boom Boom Mancini, who got in this year.
Yeah, and I mean he lost to Chavez, but that's fighting another Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
He fought Oscar De La Hoya, and he fought Trinidad, and he has those losses.
He's in. He's in. Camacho's in.
Yeah, I think it's very, plus just his sheer popularity. I think Camacho is very likely to get in.
Yeah, and when you look at a guy like Edwin Rosario, I think every so often the sport of boxing gets it right, and I think they got it right by making sure that Edwin Rosario got in, because Edwin Rosario is one of these fighters that could easily have been forgotten, and I think that by putting him in a Hall of Fame, at least theoretically, his name is among the greats, and people need to learn about him. And I believe he deserved it. And his style was exciting to watch, and those kinds of fighters don't generally have the long careers, even though his end of his career had nothing to do with boxing, or you would hope, but more from his health. So.
I mean, I think part of it is a puncher. I mean, he's a puncher. I think that explains for some of his early success too. I mean, he was looked at as sort of the new Bazooka Gomez, and I think that's one of the reasons why he became a real popular guy in the U.S. And then, of course, beating at least sometimes a loss is not a loss, and I think. He was certainly the sort of moral victor in the fight with Camacho, because a lot of people, I mean, as much as Camacho overall is a likable character, when he was in his prime, he was sort of like a Malignaggi type, where he was polarizing. Some people liked him, but some people really couldn't stand him. So when Rosario did what he did to them. Did to Camacho, and then didn't get the decision, that made him even more popular to some degree.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier, that very well could have been a contributing factor for the Fighter of the Year, Comeback Fighter of the Year. The Ring Magazine awarded him in 1986. As usual, Alex puts our blast from the past fighters in with the Title Bout Championship computer game. And does some simulations against our current champions that we have ranked on BillyCBoxing.com. So who did you put him in with, my man?
This time I put him in with, we got Mickey Bay at lightweight and Victor Postal at junior or welter. But I wanted to put him in against Crawford, too, so I put those three guys. Against Mickey Bay, the first time they fought, Edwin Rosario won by a 7th round knockout, stopped Bay at 2:20 of round number 7. And then when they fought 100 times, Rosario got the better of him. He went 91, 7, and 2. 81 wins by stoppage. And of Mickey Bay's 7 victories, he scored 6 knockouts, so that's admirable. At junior welterweight, against Postal, Rosario, he actually won. The first time they fought, he won a 12-round decision, 118 to 108, 116 to 110, and 117 109. He actually had Postal down twice in the 11th and 12th. And when they fought 100 times, Rosario got the better of Postal. He went 85, 13, and 2 draws. 71 of those 85 wins were by knockout, and of Postal's 13 victories, he scored 8 knockouts. And I think this was the one that surprised me the most. But I guess this could happen with a puncher. When I had Terrence Crawford and Rosario fight at 140, Rosario won by TKO, 5th round TKO, 1 minute and 4 seconds of the 5th. When they fought 100 times, Rosario dominates, 78 victories, 20 defeats, 2 draws. Of those 78 wins, he scored 63 knockouts, and of Crawford's 20 wins, 11 he scored by knockout.
That doesn't surprise me, because Edwin Rosario was that kind of a fighter, I mean, that's what made him good. Crawford stands in the pocket. I think a lot of this, the data that goes into the title bout might be around the Camacho fight, because if you think about it, Crawford at lightweight in his prime against Camacho at lightweight in his prime, I think Camacho beats Crawford, and I love Crawford, so I think it's general. Hey, we got a Louis from L.A. I just put a question in the chat room if anybody could look real quick when Mickey Bay's last win was. It was September of 2014. So he's pretty much, we're going to have to make an adjustment with him pretty soon, man, because he hasn't fought in over a year, but that's another story. Edwin Rosario, He's a former world lightweight and junior welterweight world champion. He had a career record, and this kind of even falls into what you were saying about his handful of losses in the title bout, Alex. He had 47 wins, 41 coming by knockout, which was a 77% career knockout percentage, which is pretty good. Of his 6 losses, every loss he lost by a stoppage, except to the Camacho loss, which was a controversial loss in 1986. So, when he did lose, he got beat up, stopped. And most of those stoppage losses were brutal losses, like the Julio Cesar Chavez fight that you mentioned earlier. Former world lightweight and junior welterweight world champion, inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2006. And like Alex said, he died at 34 years young, December 1st, 1997, a little over 2 months after his last fight, which was a second-round knockout over Harold Bennett on September 25th in 1997 in Puerto Rico. Edwin El Chapo Rosario, our blast from the past week, this week. And, of course, Alex, great job, as usual, my man. Nobody does it better than Alex Perpali. Which brings